Chapter 1. The Invisible Made Visible. The dough yielded beneath her palms, warm and alive in the cold. Ara had kneaded the same bread for 15 years, first alongside the other children in the orphan wing, then in the main kitchens once she'd grown old enough to earn her place. The rhythm soothed her. Push, turn, fold, push, turn, fold. Her hands knew the work better than her own thoughts. The great hearth had burned down to embers. Embers were enough. They cast enough light to see by, enough warmth to keep the yeast alive. Everything in the kitchen had its place, its purpose, even her. Something cracked behind her eyes. Silver light exploded through her skull, not light exactly, but something older, something that burned without heat. Sigils she could not read floated in impossible space, their edges sharp as broken glass. A figure stood before her, robed in something that shifted between fabric and mist, and its eyes. Ara grabbed the edge of the wooden table. The vision shattered. She stood gasping, her knuckles white, flour dusting the stone floor where she'd knocked it loose from the dough. The kitchen pressed close, silent, empty. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the frantic beat beneath. Another vision. They had started small, a flicker at the edge of her sight, a whisper she could almost catch. Now they crashed through her like waves against sea walls. Stupid, she muttered to herself. Stupid, worthless ups. The heavy door groaned. Torchlight spilled across the flags. Ara straightened, shoving her trembling hands back into the dough. Keep working, always keep working. Elise ducked through the doorway, her young face pinched with sleep and irritation. She carried a pine torch, and its smoke mixed with the lingering smell of last night's fires. The girl didn't look at Ara as she crossed to the warming shelves. They want honey cakes for the morning meal, Elise said, more to the air than to anyone. The Alpha King's own table. Mistress Brenna's in a state about it. Ara nodded, though Elise wasn't watching. I'll set the honey aside, hurry then, we're already behind. The girl moved past her, trailing heat and torch smoke, and was gone through the service door. The sound of her footsteps faded down the corridor. Alone again, Ara looked down at her hands. They shook. Fine tremors ran through her fingers, barely visible, but there. She buried them in the dough and worked the mixture harder than she needed to. The bread would be tough tonight. She didn't care. A moon cycle now, 28 days since the first vision, and they came more often each week. She had told no one. What would she say? I see things, Mistress Brenna, ancient things, a figure with eyes like the moon. They would think her mad, or worse, they would think her cursed. In a kingdom of shifters, of pacts and bloodlines, and the ancient bond between wolf and human, a wolfless Omega had no status at all. She served. She stayed quiet. She did not see things that weren't there, unless they were. Ara punched the dough. Flour puffed up, caught the ember light, and settled like snow on the stone. The grand hall swallowed her whole. Ara had seen it only from the service corridors, glimpses through half-open doors, the flash of crystal chandeliers, the murmur of voices too refined for the kitchens where she belonged. Now she stood in its center, trays of honeyed wine balanced on her arms, and the space felt less like a room and more like a cathedral built to honor something she would never understand. Servants moved around her in controlled chaos. One group strung garlands of winter jasmine between the chandeliers. Others polished the frost-edged carvings on the long tables until they gleamed like frozen rivers. The light through the tall windows caught the marble floors and threw it back twice as bright, twice as cold. Careful with those pastries. Crumble them, and Mistress Brenna will have your hands. Ara directed the younger servants through the service doors, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered. In the kitchen, they listened to her. She knew dough and fire and the precise alchemy of timing. Here, she was furniture useful, invisible, easily overlooked. The great doors swung open, Ara's breath caught. Lady Seraphine Stormveil swept into the hall like a winter storm given form. Her gown cascaded in layers of silver silk, catching the light and throwing it back in soft gleams. Platinum blonde hair piled high on her head, pinned with sapphires that matched the cold blue of her eyes. Her attendants followed, a dozen of them, silks rustling, perfume preceding them like a herald. Seraphine moved through the hall with the fluid grace of someone who had never questioned her right to be anywhere. She paused beside the high table, trailing her fingers along the carved wood, and surveyed the room with the eye of a general inspecting a battlefield. Ara watched from across the hall, still as the stone beneath her feet. This is her world, Ara thought. This is where she belongs. The ache in her chest surprised her. Not jealousy, not exactly. Something quieter. A recognition of distance so vast it could not be crossed. Seraphine had been born to power the way bread was born to flour. She had been taught to want thrones, alliances, the weight of a crown. Ara had been taught to want only to survive. She turned back to her work. The honey cakes needed arranging, the wine needed decanting. There were tasks to complete, and tasks did not care about the ache in her chest or the way the light made the crystal chandeliers look like frozen stars. Commander Marcus Harden entered through the side corridor. The commander moved differently than the nobles. His boots struck the marble with purpose, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. A dozen guards filed in behind him, taking positions along the walls with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times. But something was wrong. Too tense. Too alert. Ara noticed. She noticed everything. That was what kept her alive in a world that had no place for her. Their eyes met for a moment, just a moment, across the vast and gleaming hall. His scarred face revealed nothing. Then he looked away, and she was invisible again. The candles were being lit now, one by one, filling the hall with golden warmth. Outside, the sun was setting. The feast would begin soon. Ara returned to the kitchen doors, her arms full, her mind quiet, her place in the world exactly as it had always been. The king entered to thunderous applause. Theron Blackwinter filled the doorway like a storm given flesh. Dark furs cascaded from his shoulders, the pelts of creatures no common hunter could have felled. His ice-blue eyes swept the hall with the cold calculation of a chess master surveying the board. Every noble leaned forward, hungry for a glimpse, a word, a moment of his attention. At the high table, Lady Seraphine rose. Her smile was a weapon bright, possessive, already claiming him. Theron, her voice carried just enough to be heard. The evening honors us. He inclined his head, brief and formal, and moved to seat himself beside her. The musicians faltered. A new presence entered the hall. Not through the doors, but in the sudden drop of temperature, the way the candles flickered and dimmed as if something had stolen the warmth. Elder Cassius Corin stood. His aged frame seemed to draw what remained of the light, his silver beard catching the chandelier's glow. "Your Majesty!" His voice resonated with the weight of centuries. "The evening is blessed by a most extraordinary circumstance. The beast has arrived as promised, the firstborn, awakened by the ancient rites you commissioned." The great doors swung open. Ara's hands went cold. The wine pitcher trembled in her grip. It was impossible. A creature from the oldest stories, the ones grandmothers whispered to frighten children into obedience. 3 times the size of any wolf, its fur rippled like storm clouds caught in moonlight. Ancient amber eyes held epochs of knowledge. Every noble in the hall leaned back, instinct older than civilization urging them to flee. Theron's hand found his sword. This was his triumph, the firstborn bound to his will, a symbol of dominion over the old powers. The beast did not approach the throne. Its massive head turned. Those ancient eyes found Ara across the vast hall, finding her in the shadows where she had always hidden. No, the firstborn walked toward her. Each step was measured, inevitable, the soft padding of massive paws on marble the only sound in a hall that had forgotten how to breathe. Ara could not move, could not think. The wine pitcher slipped from numb fingers and shattered on the floor, the crash impossibly loud. The beast stopped before her, its head lowered, massive, ancient, powerful, and touched the marble at her feet. A bow. Not to the king. To her. The hall erupted. Voices crashed against voices. Seraphine's sharp cry cut through the din. Commander Marcus's hand flew to his sword. "Take her to the royal wing." Theron's voice sliced through chaos, cold and absolute. "Now, post guards. No one enters or leaves without my direct order." 2 guards seized her arms. The world became a blur of marble and torchlight and screaming voices as she was pulled away. She glimpsed Seraphine's face, fury and fear warring for dominance. Elder Cases nodding slowly, his ancient eyes bright with something that might have been recognition. Then the doors closed, and the grand hall was behind her, and Ara was escorted into the unknown. The queen's private chambers swallowed Ara like a tomb. She paced. The blue silk bed drapes whispered against her arms as she passed. The hearth crackled, too large, too warm. Moonlight spilled through tall windows and painted the stone floor silver. Tapestries bearing the Blackwinter crest watched from the walls wolves and crowns and ancient words she couldn't read. "What you are." Her hands trembled. The visions, she had hidden them for years, terrified someone would see and call her mad. The silver light, the robed figures, the sigils that danced behind her eyes like living things. All of it had been building toward this moment, toward the firstborn bowing, toward a king who looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. The knock came sharp and sudden. She didn't answer, didn't have time to before the door swung open and Theron entered. He had changed little from the feast, still wore the dark regalia, the furred shoulders, the weight of command like a second skin. But something in his posture had shifted. Less king now, more predator. Assessing, the door clicked shut behind him.
You don't know what you are, do you?
Not a question, a statement delivered with careful gentleness which somehow made it worse. Ara shook her head. Her throat had closed around words she couldn't find anyway. Theron moved deeper into the chamber, each step deliberate. The firstborn does not bow to those without bloodline, not to common shifters, not to omegas. He stopped near the hearth, the flames casting his angular face in shadow. The beast recognized something in ancient lineage, guardian bloodline, thought to be extinct. The word landed like a stone in still water. Guardians were a protective order, he continued, precision threading through his voice. Weavers of old magic, speakers with primal beasts, they were hunted during the Great War, their lines severed, their powers suppressed or bound. Bound, Ara's breath caught. The word echoed in some hollow part of her chest. I believe you are one of those children. Theron's ice blue eyes held hers, the binding placed on you, your inability to shift, your visions, they are symptoms of suppressed power, ancient power, the kind that could reshape kingdoms. Tears pricked her eyes, worthless, broken. That was what she had been told her entire life, that she was packless, shiftless, good for nothing but kneading dough and staying invisible. Now this man, this impossibly powerful man, was telling her she might be something else entirely, something vast and terrible and sacred. I'm placing you under my personal protection. He stepped closer, and she had to resist the urge to retreat. You will remain in the royal wing. Elder Cases is examining the palace archives for references to binding rituals and guardian lineages. His voice dropped. But you need to understand something. What you are, what you're becoming, it will destabilize the kingdom's political balance. Factions will want to control you. Others will want you dead. Seraphine will see you as a threat to her position. The council will demand answers I cannot yet give. And there may be others, outside the kingdom, who sense your awakening and move to exploit it. Ara nodded, the enormity of his words settling over her like a second skin. I'm offering you a bargain. His expression softened slightly, not warmer but less guarded. Trust me.
Allow me to protect you and investigate your heritage. In return, be patient, cautious, and honest with me about what you experience. The visions, they are significant. I need to know everything. Why would you do this?
Her voice came out thin, uncertain. I am nothing, no one. For the first time, Theron smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face, made him look younger, more human, because the firstborn doesn't bow to nothing, and because I suspect you are exactly what I have been searching for, whether I knew it or not. He left without waiting for a response. The door closed, the lock clicked, and Ara stood alone in the vast chamber, moonlight pooling at her feet. A shadow shifted in the corner. The firstborn sat motionless, massive and silent, its ancient amber eyes fixed on her. It had followed Theron here, chosen to remain, a guardian presence at the threshold of her new life. She stared at the beast. It stared back. When exhaustion finally pulled her down, she collapsed onto the great bed and surrendered to sleep, the firstborn watching over her like a sentinel at the gates of something she didn't yet understand. Chapter 2. The awakening morning came too bright, too soft. Ara woke beneath silk sheets threaded with silver, sunlight pooling across the massive bed. She lay still for a long moment, disoriented by the weight of velvet blankets, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. This was not the narrow pallet in the servants' wing. This was not anything she had earned or understood. Attendants arrived with breakfast fresh bread, honey, spiced tea, and laid out clothing finer than anything she had ever touched. They addressed her as my lady and Lady Ara, their formal deference making her stomach turn. She was a kitchen girl, she was nobody, yet they treated her as though she belonged in these chambers, as though the firstborn's bow had rewritten her entire existence. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, measured, judged. The knock came mid-morning. Elder Cassius Corin entered with surprising dignity for a man his age, carrying stacks of leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and ancient magic. He arranged them on the table near the window, his movements deliberate, scholarly. Then he turned to her. "Let me see your hands." She offered them, palms up, the calluses rough against his weathered fingers. He studied them, then lifted her chin, examining her eyes with the intensity of someone reading a lost language. "The eyes," he murmured, flipping through a volume so old its pages crackled, silvery gray flecked with moonlight, the hallmark of the lunar guardian.
Those bonded to the moon goddess. Aura's breath caught. Your physiology, your instinctual grace, your resistance to standard hierarchies, all markers of guardian lineage. He set down the book, his expression darkening.
But it is the binding marks that concern me.
He explained what he found. Runes burned into her magical essence when she was approximately 5 years old, the same age her memories began. Someone had deliberately suppressed her powers to protect her from persecution. The realization hit like a physical blow. "Who?" she whispered. Cases shook his head. "That is what we must discover. Your family's role in the Guardian Order, perhaps, or someone who sought to protect you at great cost." The first training session came that afternoon. Cases guided her to sense the binding itself. She closed her eyes, reached inward, and felt it, a web of silver light wrapped around her core, holding back something vast and terrible and magnificent. The sensation was suffocating and exhilarating in equal measure. Pain lanced through her as she pushed against it, but she could not break through. Theron appeared that evening. He stood near the hearth, watching her with those ice-blue eyes. The silence between them stretched awkward and unfamiliar. "Tell me about your life before," he said finally, "before the palace." She told him about the Eldons, the minor pack that took her in. Fragments of warmth, a woman's gentle voice, a man with kind eyes. Then, at age 7, the pack's alpha had decided she was too much liability as a wolfless Omega and sold her to the palace kitchens for coin. Theron's jaw tightened. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening of resolve. "That changes," he said quietly. "No Omega Guardian or otherwise will be treated as chattel in my kingdom again, not while I can prevent it." Seraphine's attempts to see her came twice that week. Both times guards turned her away at Theron's direct order. Word spread through the court like poison, the betrothed queen cast aside for a kitchen girl. By the 5th morning, Aura could sense the binding without guidance. The power beneath it pulsed like a second heartbeat, vast, old, increasingly insistent. That night, she dreamed in silver light, and voices spoke in languages she did not consciously know but somehow understood. The message arrived at midnight, a riderless horse, foam-flecked and wild-eyed, thundering through the palace gates. The courier had fallen 2 miles out, his body broken against the stones. But his message survived, scrawled in frantic ink on parchment stained with sweat and fear. "Shadow attack at Northwatch. 3 dead. The commander requests the king's presence immediately." Theron did not hesitate. He summoned his personal guard, 12 of his best, and left the palace before dawn painted the eastern sky. The ride northward was brutal, the horses pushed to their limits across frozen roads and moonlit fields. By the time Northwatch's dark silhouette emerged from the pre-dawn mist, Theron's muscles screamed and his breath came in ragged clouds. The fortress sprawled along the border ridge, its ancient stones blackened by centuries of weather and war. Torchlight flickered along the ramparts, casting dancing shadows against the walls. But it was the silence that struck him first. An unnatural quiet where centuries should have been murmuring, and steel should have been ringing. Marcus met him at the gate. The commander's face told the story before his lips moved. 3 bodies lay shrouded in the courtyard, their forms too still beneath rough-spun cloth. Blood stained the cobblestones, dark and spreading even now, hours after the attack. "They came from the Shadowlands, Your Majesty." Marcus's voice was flat, controlled, the tone of a man processing horror through discipline. They moved like they were hunting something specific. "When our archers injured one, it bled darkness, not blood." Theron's stomach tightened, and they spoke, or tried to. Marcus hesitated, and something like fear flickered behind his eyes. The words were corrupted, but I heard them speaking a name, repeatedly. "The Guardian. Find the Guardian." The words hit like a physical blow. Theron felt the blood drain from his face, felt the cold settle into his bones, not from the winter air, but from understanding. The shadows were hunting Aura. He stood in that courtyard as the first light of dawn touched the ramparts, watching the shadows dissolve like smoke before the sun. 3 of his guards were dead. 3 men who had served him, trained with him, trusted him to keep them safe. And they had died because something ancient and terrible had awakened, drawn by the emergence of a true guardian. The ride back to the capital was faster than the journey north. Theron pushed his horse until it nearly collapsed, then swapped for fresh mounts at the relay stations. His mind raced through implications, calculations, worst-case scenarios. Aura was not a political complication, she was a beacon, and every moment her power grew, more of these creatures would come. He reached the palace as evening fell, the sky bleeding purple and gold above the towers. Elder Cases waited in the entrance hall, his face pale but composed. The elderly historian gripped his staff like a lifeline, and Theron knew immediately that he had already heard. In the archives, Cases said without preamble, leading Theron toward his study. References to shadow servants, creatures bound by dark magic to hunt and destroy guardian bloodlines. During the Great War, they were the instruments of persecution, tools deployed against guardians to drive them into hiding. They are reawakening. Theron's voice came out harder than he intended. Cases nodded slowly. Drawn by the emergence of a true guardian, someone or something is calling them to hunt her. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Theron found Aura in the training rooms. She sat cross-legged on a mat, eyes closed, her breathing slow and deliberate. Sweat beaded at her temples despite the room's chill. Around her, the air seemed to shimmer faintly with silver light, the unmistakable signature of guardian magic struggling against its bindings. She opened her eyes the moment he stepped through the doorway. Her gaze found his face, and he saw the moment she understood. The calm that had settled over her features cracked, revealing something raw beneath. "Tell me," she said. He did. Every detail, every grim piece of information, every implication. He did not soften the danger or offer false comfort. He told her about the shadows, the dead guards, the name they had spoken. When he finished, the silence stretched between them like a held breath. "I'm sorry," Aura whispered. "I brought this danger to your kingdom." Theron crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level, and took her hands in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly against his palms. "No," he said firmly, "your awakening did not create this danger, it revealed it. These forces have been biding their time, waiting. The question now is whether we have the strength and wisdom to face them." He held her gaze, willing her to understand, to believe him, and I believe we do, if you are willing to accelerate your training. Aura's gray eyes searched his face. Whatever she found there, whatever answer she was looking for, it must have satisfied her. She straightened her spine, and something shifted in her expression, a hardening of resolve, a quiet acceptance of the path ahead. "I am," she said. The archive lay beneath the palace like a buried cathedral. Aura descended the worn stone steps behind Elder Cases, one hand trailing along the cool wall. The firstborn walked ahead of them, his massive form moving with unnatural silence through the darkness. Moonlight fell through a high grating above, a single silver pillar that made the dust motes sparkle like scattered stars. The chamber opened before her, rows upon rows of shelves disappearing into shadow, stuffed with books, scrolls, and tablets of ancient stone. The air was dry, heavy with centuries of accumulated silence. "We begin here," Casey said, gesturing to a section of crumbling volumes. "The genealogical records. If your bloodline survived, there will be a trace." The work was painstaking. Many texts were written in old languages Aura did not recognize, encoding ciphers that yielded nothing to her untrained eyes. But Casey's guided her through the process, showing her how to read the older scripts, how to trace lineage markers across generations. She learned that the Guardian Order once numbered 7 bloodlines, each bonded to a different aspect of the divine. Her line, the Lunar Guardians, were healers and watchers, bonded to the Moon Goddess, capable of communing with primal beasts and sensing danger across vast distances. The genealogical record came in the 3rd hour of searching, the Eldon family, minor nobility with a hidden guardian bloodline. The line was marked for persecution during the Great War. An entry, written in urgent, cramped handwriting, read, "The child must be hidden. The binding must be absolute. If she is discovered, all is lost. Let her live as nothing rather than die as everything." Aura's throat tightened. For her entire life, she had been told she was nothing, worthless, invisible. Now she understood that invisibility was a mercy, a sacrifice made by people who loved her, people willing to bind her power and diminish her so that she might survive. But then Cases found something more. His breath caught. Ara. The second record was only 15 years old, a second binding ritual performed shortly after she was placed in the palace kitchens. New runes, different handwriting. Notation at the bottom read, "Commission completed by order of the North Guard's Inner Council, payment rendered in gold." Ara's voice came out cold. "Someone paid to bind me further." Cases nodded grimly. "The binding placed on you at age 5 was to protect you from persecution. This second binding, performed at age 7, appears designed to suppress your nature more completely, to ensure you would never be discovered or tempted to assert your bloodline." The implications crashed through her. She was not just hidden, she was deliberately, repeatedly suppressed by those who had authority over her.
The Elden sold her not from cruelty, but from compliance with some darker mandate. Something cracked open inside her. The first real rage she had ever allowed herself to feel rose from her belly like a second heartbeat. The firstborn growled, low and resonant, recognizing something in her. The temperature in the chamber dropped, and the candlelight flickered wildly. Cases placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "This is what you must understand, child. Your power is not a gift from the gods. It is an inheritance purchased by sacrifice and protected by suppression. To claim it fully, you must not only learn to wield it, you must forgive those who hid it and destroy those who bound it."
Arata turned to look at him. Her gray eyes, when she met his gaze, were no longer the uncertain eyes of a kitchen worker. They were the eyes of someone beginning to understand the true scope of what had been done to her and what she might become. The full moon rose like a watching eye. Ara stood at the window of the queen's chambers, fingers pressed against cold stone. Below, the palace grounds churned with movement guards sprinting to positions, torches flaring to life along the walls. Commander Hardin's voice cutting through the night with clipped commands. The shadows had been spotted at the tree line, hundreds of them flowing forward like black water. "They come," Cases said quietly. He stood behind her, staff in hand, ancient runes glowing faintly along its length. "Stay back from the windows, child. They seek you." The first scream shattered the night. Ara watched as the shadows hit the outer defenses like a wave. Guards raised swords, spears, crossbows, but the darkness simply flowed around them, through them. Men staggered, blades passing through spectral forms as if through smoke. Then Cases's blessed blades bit home and the shadows bled darkness, shrieking in voices that sounded like tearing silk. "The outer perimeter has fallen," one of the guards reported, breathless. "They're in the courtyard." Theron. The thought came unbidden, and with it came something else, a sudden awareness of his presence, not as a distant figure but as a warmth in her chest, a second heartbeat, the mate bond. She had felt its stirrings before, subtle and uncertain. But now, with danger bearing down on them both, it blazed into clarity. She could feel him, the fury and focus in his movements, the ache in his shoulders where a shadow claw had torn through his leather armor, the desperate calculation as he counted enemies and found them endless. He was fighting like a man drowning in darkness, burning through energy he did not have. "I'm here," she thought, not knowing if the message would carry. Something answered. "Ara." His voice in her mind, ragged with surprise and pain. "You feel this?" "Yes, they're too many. I can't." She understood. He was one man, however powerful. The shadows would overwhelm him through sheer attrition. The binding inside her pulsed, that familiar cage of suppressed power. But now, looking down at the chaos in the courtyard, watching Theron fight with teeth and claws and desperate strength, something shifted. She had spent her whole life being nothing, invisible, bound and gagged and sold like broken goods. No more. Ara placed her hands on the windowsill and closed her eyes. She stopped fighting the binding and instead reached past it, past the fears that had kept her small, past the voice that whispered she was unworthy. She reached for the vast, ancient thing that had been sleeping in her blood since birth, and she called. The power that answered was not gentle. It erupted from her core like a silver star being born, flooding through channels that had been sealed for 20 years. Light poured from her skin, from her eyes, from the tips of her fingers where they touched the stone. The guards stumbled back. Cases raised his staff in protection, then lowered it as he realized the light was not a threat. It flowed through the mate bond. Theron gasped. She felt it, felt him feel it, as guardian magic surged into him like a river breaking through a dam. His strength multiplied tenfold, his half-shifted form stabilized, the impossible becoming manifest as silver light threaded through his wolf self. He turned to face the shadows, and when he roared, the sound carried the weight of ancient power. The shadows recoiled. They had come for the guardian. They had not expected the guardian to have an anchor, a mate, a bond that could transmit force. The darkness writhed and screamed, pressing forward for one more moment before it began to fail. The retreat was swift. The shadows poured backward like a tide fleeing the shore, leaving trails of dissipating darkness in their wake. The smell of something ancient and defeated lingered in the air, ozone and ash and the faint, sweet scent of moonlight on snow. Ara's legs gave way, the light winked out. The bond remained, blazing like a brand in her chest, but her body could not sustain the working. She fell, and strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. Theron, he knelt in the chamber, still half-shifted, blood staining his face and armor. But his eyes, his ice-blue eyes that had always been so guarded, were open and raw. He held her against him, and she felt the mate bond settle into something final, something irreversible. No more ambiguity, no more political calculations. They were bound guardian and alpha, in a partnership that would reshape the realm. "Stay with me," he said, voice rough. Ara managed a faint smile. "Try getting rid of me now." Cases approached, staff lowered. The guards exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The elder's voice, when it came, carried the weight of acknowledgement. The shadows would return.
And this was only the first wave.
He paused, looking at Phelan, then at Ara. But they now know what they face. A bonded pair, guardian and king. The old powers awaken. The moon hung full and watchful outside the window. The night was far from over. Ara's recovery astonished even elder cases. The guardian power, once a sealed river within her, now flowed freely enough to accelerate healing beyond ordinary bounds. By the second day, she walked without assistance. By the fourth, she could sit in meditation, feeling the currents of magic that had always surrounded her but never before been accessible. Theron took her to the temple on the fifth morning. The temple of the first guardian stood at the palace's highest point, a structure of white stone and silver inlays that caught the dawn light. Ara had seen it in visions, but the reality dwarfed her expectations. The sigils carved into every surface glowed faintly with residual power. The air hummed with ancient magic so dense she could taste it, copper and moonlight and something older than memory. Kairos walked beside her, and as they crossed the threshold, the transformation happened. The massive wolf shimmered, its form stretched and darkened, becoming something between creature and shadow, a humanoid silhouette twice her height, woven from star-dusted darkness. When it spoke, the words arrived not through sound but directly in her mind, vast and grinding like tectonic plates. "Guardian child, the bond is sealed, the bloodline awaken. I am Kairos, eldest of the primal beasts, first keeper of the moon goddess's trust. I have waited through ages for one worthy of this guardianship. You have proven worthy. I am yours to command, and you are mine to protect." Ara's legs buckled. She knelt on the cold stone, overwhelmed by the weight of what was happening. Not a queen by marriage alone, she was becoming a guardian in truth, reconnecting with a legacy that had slumbered for centuries. "The claiming ceremony will take place on the full moon," Cases explained, approaching from the temple entrance 3 days from now. "The mate bond will be publicly acknowledged, your bloodline legitimized before the realm." Word spread quickly through the palace, Seraphine's betrothal dissolved by royal decree, her influence evaporating like morning frost. She watched the preparations from shadowed doorways, fury and fear warring across her perfect features. In the queen's chambers, Theron and Ara practiced their vows. The words were part political declaration, part sacred promise. "You are the first thing that has felt like more than duty," Theron admitted one evening, his voice dropping. "The first thing that feels like home." Ara absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle between them. "I spent my whole life invisible," she said slowly. "Now I'm seen. It's disorienting, but I'm choosing this, choosing you, not because of the bond, because of what we can build together." Kairos demonstrated how to channel their connection, how to call upon its strength. The link was intuitive, ancient, and comforting. A constant presence, now guardian, companion, external proof of the power growing within her. The council chamber struck Ara as cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Stone walls bore the faded faces of past kings, their painted eyes watching the present with what seemed like weary judgment. Tapestries depicting the four Alpha kingdoms hung between arched windows, their colors muted by centuries. Theron stood at the head of the long oak table, his hands clasped behind his back. The claiming ceremony takes place tomorrow. I expect your full support in making it a success. The council members filed in, 4 of them, though Ara noticed the seats filled with hesitation. Gareth Northmarch took his place with his jaw set tight. Lady Meredith Stoneheart smoothed her skirts with excessive care. The other 2 exchanged glances Ara couldn't read.
Your Majesty?
Gareth's voice carried the weight of practiced authority. Before we proceed with any announcements, I must formally request that the ceremony be postponed. Ara watched Theron's expression remain neutral.
On what grounds?
The woman's bloodline remains unverified. We have only the word of an ancient beast and scrolls that could easily be forged. Gareth spread his hands. What if this is precisely what the Shadows want? What if she is a trap? A planted agent designed to weaken the throne from within? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Lady Meredith leaned forward, her tone sharp. And perhaps we should question whether her rise is truly destiny or simply emotion. A pretty girl caught the king's eye, and suddenly she is Queen Guardian? It strains credulity. Theron's response came without hesitation. Ara's heritage is authentic, her power is genuine, and my bond with her is not a weakness but a strength. He paused, and Ara saw his shoulders relax slightly. However, I value your counsel. I am prepared to offer concessions. Ara will be crowned as Queen Guardian, not as primary queen. She will have authority over the rebuilding of the Guardian Order, but not over matters of general governance. She will wear the crown of guardianship, not the crown of the realm. Does this satisfy the council's concerns? The room fell silent. One by one, the council members nodded. All except Gareth. You are making a mistake. Gareth rose from his seat, his chair scraping against stone. You are elevating a creature of shadow and binding yourself to a bloodline that has always been a curse rather than a blessing. If you proceed with this ceremony, I can make no guarantee of the northern province's continued loyalty. The threat settled over the chamber like a shroud. Theron's voice dropped to ice. Then you are dismissed from the council, and you will confine yourself to your estates pending further investigation into your communications with external powers. Commander Marcus, see that the former counselor is escorted from the palace. Marcus stepped forward, his hand on his sword. Gareth's face reddened, but he allowed himself to be led from the chamber without further protest. Later that evening, Theron found Ara in the Queen's chambers. His expression had darkened further. Gareth was not acting alone, he said. Investigation revealed communications with southern interests. And Seraphine. Ara felt the name land like a stone in still water. Seraphine? She orchestrated the opposition. Her father sees advantage in destabilizing the north. Theron met her eyes. She will be sent from the palace by dawn. The confrontation came at dusk. Seraphine swept into the antechamber, her silver gown catching the dying light. Her beauty remained flawless, but her eyes burned with something feral. You are not a queen, Seraphine said, her voice barely above a whisper. You are a mistake that has been allowed to grow too large. When you fall, and you will fall, I will be there to dance on your grave. Theron moved between them, his presence a wall of controlled fury. If you ever threaten the Queen Guardian again, I will personally ensure that your final breath is drawn in agony. Do you understand? Seraphine's bow was a study in contempt. Perfectly, Your Majesty. She swept past, and Ara felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. This was not a fairy tale where enemies dissolved after grand declarations. This was politics, survival, and the cold mathematics of power. She was no longer just a guardian awakening. She was a target. The moonlight turned the chamber into a silver cathedral. Ara stood at the window, watching the moon hang fat and luminous above the palace towers. Tomorrow night it would be full. Tomorrow night everything would change. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the council chamber, Gareth's sneering face, Lady Meredith's dismissive tone, Seraphine's promise of ruin. She saw herself standing before the kingdom, and the thought made her stomach clench into knots. The weight of it was impossible to ignore. Mate to the Alpha King, guardian of the realm, a woman who had kneaded dough in the kitchens 3 weeks ago, now about to be crowned in moonlight and magic. A sound at the door made her turn. Theron entered alone, his guards dismissed somewhere in the corridor. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his face drawn with an exhaustion she recognized. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "The traditions, can wait." He stopped beside her at the window. "I couldn't sleep either." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the moon's slow climb. The firstborn lifted his massive head from the corner, amber eyes gleaming, then settled back into watchful stillness. "I'm terrified," Ara said quietly. The admission cost her something, not of the ceremony, of after, of being seen, truly seen, and found wanting. Iran turned to face her. "You think you're a fraud?" "I think the power inside me might be corrupted, that the shadows are hunting me because there's something dark in what I am." She met his eyes. "What if I'm not a guardian? What if I'm the danger everyone fears?" His hands closed around hers, warm and solid. "You are not a fraud. You are not weak." His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You are the most powerful person I have ever met, and I am honored to stand beside you." The words landed somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where the binding had lived for so long. She felt it loosen, just slightly. "You don't know that," she whispered. "I know what I feel through the bond. I know what the firstborn bowed to. I know what I saw when you channeled power through me to repel the shadows." He lifted one hand to cup her cheek. "You are not the danger, Ara. You are the answer." She leaned into his touch, and something in her chest broke open, not painfully, but like a door long locked finally giving way. She rose to meet him, and their embrace was neither desperate nor demanding. It was home, it was right, it was two people choosing each other despite the chaos waiting beyond the walls. They stayed like that until the sky began to lighten in the east. The knock came just before dawn. Elder Cases entered with a tray bearing 2 amulets, small circles of silver etched with runes that hummed faintly with power. "The ritual requires these," he said, placing one around Theron's neck, then Ara's. "They will bind your fates together and protect you from interference during the linking." He explained the ceremony, the walk through the temple, the joining of hands, the moment when Kairos would channel ancient power through them both. The mate bond would seal publicly, irrevocably. Then he produced the crown. It lay on black velvet, a circlet of silver worked into patterns of moon phases and swirling stars. At its center, a single moonstone caught the early light and held it, glowing with soft luminescence. Ara lifted it. The weight was significant, not heavy but present. She placed it on her head. The sensation was immediate. Not burden, not fear, rightness, like a key sliding into a lock she hadn't known existed. She looked at Theron, he smiled, and together they walked toward the dawn. Chapter 3: The Coronation and the New Order. The moon crested the horizon, and silver light flooded the temple like water breaking through a dam. Ara felt it wash over her skin, cool, electric, alive. Every polished surface caught the glow and threw it back, until the chamber blazed with luminous fire. Elder Cases offered his arm. "Are you ready?" "No." But she took his arm anyway. She stepped forward, and the crowd parted for her. The gown moved like water around her legs, deep blue silk stitched with silver thread in patterns she now recognized as guardian sigils. The crown sat heavy on her head, catching moonlight and casting it back in cascading radiance. She heard the gasps, felt the weight of 1,000 stairs. She did not stumble, she did not falter. She walked forward as though she had been born to this. Theron appeared behind her. Dark leathers and furs worked with silver and moonstone. His bearing held the perfect balance of predator and king. When his eyes found hers across the temple, the connection struck her like a physical force, a current running between them that made the air itself hum. They met at the altar. Kairos stepped forward. His form flickered between the great black wolf and the star-dusted humanoid silhouette. He raised his voice, and the sound that emerged was neither quite wolf nor human. It was older, deeper. A prayer, a recognition, a prophecy given voice. The stones beneath their feet vibrated with sacred power. Theron took her hand. The moment their palms touched, the bond became visible. Silver light flowed between them like electricity, creating a circuit that encompassed both their forms. Ara gasped. The light was warm. It was home. From shadow to light, Elder Cases intoned. From isolation to union, they answered together. The vows came easily, words spoken by guardian queens and alpha kings since time immemorial. Partnership, protection, service to the realm, service to each other. When the final word faded, Kairos moved forward. In his wolf form, he pressed his massive head against their clasped hands. The light exploded. Silver fire erupted from the point of contact, so bright that every observer shielded their eyes. Ara felt power flood through her, not violent but overwhelming. Complete. She heard Theron's sharp intake of breath and knew he felt it too. When the light faded, she understood what had changed. She looked down at her hands. They glowed faintly, as did Theron's. Her eyes burned with inner luminescence. The air around them crackled with the culmination of the mate bond and the sealing of her heritage. Elder Cases raised his voice. Before the moon and all here gathered, I declare, Alara Moon Whisper is recognized as true guardian of the Northern Realm, heir to the lunar guardianship, mate to King Theron Blackwinter, and rightful queen guardian of all who dwell within these borders. Let all who hear this declaration accord her the honor and protection due to her station.
The Age of Guardians is reborn.
Silence held for one heartbeat. Then the assembly answered. Some voices rang with clear enthusiasm, others carried reluctant acceptance, but all understood the realm had changed. The representatives from the other Alpha Kingdoms approached. One by one they knelt, a gesture of recognition and respect. The four kings acknowledged the return of the Guardian Order. The celebration began. Musicians played. Wine flowed. Ara and Theron moved through the assembled guests as a united front, accepting acknowledgement and offering thanks in return. She was not invisible anymore. She was seen. She was acknowledged. She was valued. 3 days after the ceremony, the celebration had faded like morning frost under spring sun, and reality settled into Ara's bones like cold. She stood alone in the royal chambers, hands trembling as she read the reports. Border provinces, shadow attacks, entire villages abandoned near the Shadowlands. The shadows moved with coordinated purpose now, no longer random raids but something organized, directed. The door opened. Elder Cases entered, his face carved from the same gray stone as the ancient temples. You've seen the reports. It was not a question. The shadows are moving faster. Ara set the parchment down. They're not hunting anymore. They're gathering. Cases nodded slowly. He lowered himself into a chair, the movement costing him more than it should. I've spent the night in the archive, cross-referencing ancient texts with current observations, and his gray eyes met hers. The shadows are not acting of their own will. They are being summoned, directed by something in the Shadowland, something old, something that predates the current realm. Ara felt the words land like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward through her chest. The Guardians were charged with containing such things. Yes. Cases leaned forward, staff clutched tight. The binding that suppressed your power, it was part of a larger suppression. When you woke, you broke more than your own chains. You broke a seal. The room tilted. Ara gripped the edge of the desk. My awakening triggered theirs. We don't know if it's irreversible, but yes, the correlation is undeniable. She turned away from him, staring at the cold fireplace. All her life she had believed herself worthless, a burden. Then the firstborn knelt. Then the crown. Then the vows. She had thought, she had hoped, that her awakening meant something pure, redeeming. Instead, she had opened a door that should have stayed closed. The door opened again. Theron entered, still dressed in the leathers he'd worn for morning court. His eyes found her immediately, reading something in her posture that made his jaw tighten. Leave us, he said to Cases. The elder hesitated, then obeyed, closing the door behind him. Theron crossed the room in 3 strides. His arms came around her, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest. For a moment, she let herself sink into him, let his strength hold her upright when her own legs wanted to fail. I have destroyed everything, she whispered. I was safest hidden away. Powerless. My awakening has opened a door that should have stayed closed. His hand cupped the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair. No, this door was always going to open, with or without you. The question is whether we face what emerges from it, or hide and hope it passes us by. He pulled back enough to look down at her. I choose to face it, and I choose to face it with you. Even as he spoke, she felt the tremor in him, his own doubt bleeding through the bond. Claiming her had committed the kingdom to something far more dangerous than anyone understood. He was bound to her now, to her mission, to a war that predated his reign. Later, Cases returned alone. He found her at the window, staring north toward the Shadowlands, where the sky seemed darker than it should. You may have awakened not to save the kingdom, he said quietly, but to be consumed by forces you are not yet ready to face. The Guardians were warriors first, rulers second. He paused. You may need to become a warrior in ways you have not yet imagined. Ara watched the northern horizon pulse with unnatural shadow. The claiming ceremony had not been an ending, it had been a beginning, and what came next would test every ounce of her strength. The borderlands stretched before them like a wound in the world. Ara sat astride Kairos, the massive wolf's flanks heaving beneath her. The firstborn's fur rippled with storm-cloud iridescence, amber eyes fixed on the horizon where normal daylight met consuming darkness. Behind her, Theron sat mounted on his warhorse, the assembled army spread across the cracked stone, his guards, the northern levies, and warriors from 3 allied kingdoms who had ridden through the night to answer the call. The shadows know we're here, Theron said, voice low. They've been waiting. Ara's fingers tightened on the hilt of her blessed blade. The metal hummed with Cassus's blessings, warm against her palm. This is where they wanted the battle. The first wave hit without warning. Shadow creatures poured from the darkness like oil spilling across stone, their forms twisted and wrong. The army met them with a roar that shook the sky. Blessed steel bit into shadow flesh, and for the first time, the creatures screamed as they died. Kairos lunged forward. Ara rose in her stirrups, blade sweeping in an arc that severed 2 shadows in a single stroke. The firstborn's jaws closed around a third, shaking it apart like wet paper. They carved through the chaos together, movement synchronized so perfectly it felt like breathing. Then the darkness itself began to coalesce. It rose from the deepest part of the Shadowlands, a shape that defied comprehension. Too many limbs, too many eyes. Something ancient and patient, bound by rituals older than the kingdoms themselves, now straining against its chains as Ara's presence weakened them further. Theron was beside her in an instant, blade drawn, alpha strength burning in his eyes. That's what they've been serving and what they're trying to free. Ara dismounted, feet finding solid ground. Kairos shifted beside her, form rippling between wolf and something larger, something more terrible. We end this now. They attacked as one. The entity's limbs struck like spears, tearing through stone where Theron rolled clear. He came up swinging, each blow carrying enough force to shatter bone, keeping the creature's attention divided. Ara flung magic like spears of silver light, but the entity absorbed them, grew stronger. The bond between her and Theron blazed. She felt his exhaustion, his pain, his refusal to yield. Through that connection, she drew on his strength and he drew on hers. It's too powerful, he gasped, parrying a strike that drove him to one knee. Ara watched the creature advance, watched the gateway behind it pulse and writhe, the barrier between realms growing weaker with every moment. She understood then what cases had meant. Warriors first, rulers second. Instead of raising her blade defensively, she sheathed it. Ara, what? She reached deeper than she ever had, past the training, past the careful control cases had taught her, past the fear that had defined her whole life. She found the source of her bloodline, the lunar guardian power that had slept within her for 20 years, suppressed and forgotten. And she let it flow through her unfiltered. The light that erupted from her body was blinding. Silver and pure, it tore through the darkness like dawn breaking over a nightmare. The shadow creatures vanished in its path, unmade at the molecular level. The ancient entity shrieked, a sound that existed somewhere between sound and thought, and began to dissolve, its form unraveling backwards toward the gateway. The breach snapped shut with the finality of a tomb closing. Ara felt herself falling. The power had taken everything. Theron's arms caught her before she hit the ground. His face hovered above hers, features tight with fear and something far deeper. I have you, he said, voice breaking. I will always have you. Rest now, my guardian, my mate, my queen. The throne room of the Ice Moon Palace had changed. Ara noted it every time she took her seat beside Theron, the way the light fell differently now, the way the ancient banners seemed to brighter, the way a second throne had been crafted beside the first. Not a copy, but complement. Silver and blue threads wove through its dark wood, catching the light from the tall windows that line the eastern wall. She listened to the petition before them, a farmer from the eastern valleys requesting aid to rebuild irrigation channels destroyed during the shadow attacks. His voice trembled, not from fear of her, but from the simple awe of standing before royalty. Ara leaned forward. How many families depend on those channels? The farmer blinked, clearly surprised she had spoken directly to him.
Near 300, Your Majesty.
Then the kingdom will provide the materials and labor. She glanced at Theron, who nodded slightly. We will also send a Guardian-trained engineer to ensure the new channels are warded against corruption. The shadows left taint in the soil. We cannot risk another harvest failing. The farmer's relief was palpable. He bowed repeatedly, backing away as guards escorted him out. You handled that well, Theron murmured as the next petitioner approached. He reminded me of myself, Ara replied quietly, someone who believed they had no voice. The morning wore on. Petitions regarding trade disputes, border patrols, inheritance claims, all requiring their joint judgment. Ara had learned to read the subtle shifts in Theron's expression, the way his jaw tightened when he sensed deception, the softening around his eyes when a genuine need presented itself. She had learned to trust her own instincts too, to speak when the magic beneath her skin hummed with warning or assurance. When the court finally recessed, elder cases waited in the corridor. 3 new awakenings this week, he reported, falling into step beside them. 2 from the northern villages, 1 from the coast, all responding well to training. Ara smiled. They are finding their way home. Cases returned the smile, the lines around his eyes deepening with contentment. The temple is full again. Children learning what was taken from them, what was stolen by fear and politics. He paused at the intersection leading to the training halls. I am needed there. But I wanted to say, he hesitated, looking at Ara with something like wonder. I spent my life studying guardians through texts and fragments. Now I watch them bloom. Thank you, Your Majesty, for making my life's work mean something. He bowed and departed before she could respond. Marcus approached as they walked toward the private wing, his new rank evident in the finer armor he wore. The integrated defense force had proven its worth in the months since the Battle 3 border skirmishes quelled without loss of life, shadow remnants neutralized before they could coalesce. The northern watchtowers are fully operational, he reported. Guardian sigils embedded in the stonework. Nothing gets through now. And the southern reports? Theron asked. Marcus's expression flickered. Lady Seraphine consolidates power, but she moves slowly. She knows the kingdom is stronger now. Let her scheme, Ara said. We will be ready. They parted ways at the Queen's chambers. The room smelled of lavender and pine, as it always did, the hearth crackling gently despite the spring warmth. Hyro stood by the window in humanoid form, starlight still dusted across its dark features, watching the palace grounds below. The borders are quiet, it said, the seals hold. Ara nodded, touching its arm briefly in greeting. Rest. I feel you haven't shifted in days. The firstborn's amber eyes softened, a gesture she had come to recognize as affection. It moved past her, toward the door, and in a ripple of shadow became Wolf, slipping through the corridors to the outside world. Theron had already removed his formal attire, sitting on the bed's edge, watching her with an expression she had grown accustomed to, something between adoration and fascination. You think too loudly, she said, crossing to him. I think about how lucky I am. He pulled her down beside him, one arm circling her waist. 6 months ago, I was a king with a kingdom and an empty throne beside me. Now you have a kitchen girl taking up space. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Now I have a queen who puts farmers and servants before dukes and earls. Now I have a partner who sees what I cannot. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Do you remember the kitchen where you worked? The invisibility? Ara nodded, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I do. It feels like a different life. Like someone else's story. That was not your story, Theron said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. This is a story of power discovered, of worth recognized, of a kingdom transformed by one woman who was willing to claim her destiny. Ara looked up at him, her silvery gray eyes now constantly touched with hints of silver light, a permanent reflection of the guardian power that flowed through her. Our story, she corrected gently. I could not have done this alone. Theron smiled, and in that smile was all the love and respect and partnership that had grown between them. Then let us write the next chapter together. Outside the window, the kingdom spread beneath them. Villages rebuilding, roads being restored, fields turning green with new growth. The full moon hung in the darkening sky, silver light bathing the palace in its blessing. The Age of Guardians had returned, and the realm would never be the same.